So I signed with my agent that was with Writer's House, and so then the book became The Crown's Game. I'd only thought I'd write one, but they wanted two, and it was a 6-figure 2-book deal, and it was kind of like, this was the dream. This is what I was working towards. It's really important for aspiring writers not to look at where a successful author is now and think, I need to jump from point A to point M. There's so many steps along the way.
Being a writer is one of the world's most desired careers. It is the second most popular career search in the world. Want to know how to start writing and make a living from it? Evelyn Skye has all the answers. She's gone from zero to New York Times bestselling author and #1 Netflix film and literary collaborator with Damsel, earning multiple 6 figures from her book deals. She is an incredible example of what we can build when we wholeheartedly believe in our vision. I bet you'll be totally inspired after this interview that you can write the book that is inside you. Hi, Evelyn. Greetings to San Francisco Bay Area and welcome to the show. I have been looking forward to this since you told me you're happy to talk with me about really anything I like. So before we get into the meat, I'm gonna ask you a question to pique anyone's interest. I know that you had your first date in a bookstore and he said, I can never leave a bookstore without buying a huge bag of books. And 18 months later, he proposed in the same bookstore. This is freaking bonkers, I think. Could you share a bit more about, this anecdote from your life?
Oh, I love this. I love that you know about that. I'm thrilled to be here. I met my husband, Tom, in a bookstore. So we were actually supposed to, it was a blind date. We had met through an app. We were going to meet at a cafe that was next door to the bookstore. And it was later. But I had to do an event at a bookstore. I was a host at the time for authors who were coming on tour through Kepler's, our local independent bookstore. And so I was going to be on stage at this event, and afterwards I was going to go to the cafe to meet him. His friend, he had talked to his friend and said, should I go to this event? Is that weird? Would it seem like I'm stalking her? Because he loves books, right? And he was very curious about me. He knew that my first book was about to be published, but his friend said, oh my gosh, no, absolutely you should go. You should show her that you support what she's doing. And so when I walked out onto stage with this author, I saw him, and before he saw me, and she knew that I was supposed to go on this date afterwards. And we paused in the aisle and I said, oh my gosh, she's here. That's him. And she looked at him. She's like, oh, he's cute. So that was the first time we actually locked eyes on each other. So we like to say we met in the bookstore, even though afterwards we had our date. But so I did the event and he was in the audience. And at the end of the event, I had to go, and sign some books and talk to the author before she left in the green room. So I said, hey, I'll be right back. And he was on his phone. And most of the time you think people are just, they're on Facebook or something, or I don't even know, reading articles. And he's like, oh, no problem. I'm reading a book right now. So I'm fine. Take your time. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're using your phone to read a book. So when I finally wrapped everything up, at the bookstore, I came to get him for our actual date. And he stands up and he has this big paper bag full of books. And he was a little bit sheepish. And he said, I can just never leave a bookstore without buying a ton of books. And I thought, who is this guy? Is he for real? So yeah, it was a wonderful first date. Obviously it worked out. Like you said, 18 months later, he proposed. We had both gone to Stanford. So it was a 2-part proposal. We went to Stanford and he got down on one knee with the ring there. And then he said, but we're not done yet. After I said yes, he said, we're not done yet. And he took me to the bookstore, back to Kepler's. He had been there earlier in the day and left roses for me. And the booksellers, they of course knew who we were, right? And so they were so excited that they had champagne ready for us. So we walked into the bookstore and that was the second part of the proposal. So yeah, it's magical. It is a book lover's dream come true.
I know that we've got a lot to cover, Evelyn, because you are a lot. Could you tell everyone a little bit about you? Who is Evelyn Skye? And is Evelyn Skye your real name or is it a pen name?
That's a great question. Okay, so I'm Evelyn Skye, New York Times bestselling author of 9 novels. I'm also a collaborator with Netflix on their #1 Netflix film Damsel, and I wrote the book for that. That's right there. That's the non-movie cover. We also have a movie tie-in edition. Evelyn Skye is sort of my real name and sort of not. So I was born Evelyn Skye Sue. So Skye used to be my middle name. And then when I started writing, I decided that I wanted to be Evelyn Skye. And I got to a point in my life, I was, I think, 36 at that time. And I said, you know what? I'm going to be who I want to be. I was going through a divorce at the time. I had a different last name. I have my married name from my first husband. And when I was kind of figuring out who I was again, I thought, I just want to decide what my name is. And I'm going to say who I am in this world. And so I legally changed my name to Evelyn Skye. So Skye is now my last name. It was originally, like I said, my middle name. And so yes, it is my real name, but in a way that I made a reality for myself.
And I know, Evelyn, that you've written 10 novels for adults, for young adults, and for children. Now you are more focusing on adults. Yes. Could you take us a bit on this journey and tell us, where you started, how old you were when you started, and how old you are now, with which book did it start, and now where are you now in your writer career?
Yeah, absolutely. I love to tell this story because I think it's actually really important for writers to know how perseverance can pay off, but also that it takes time to really develop your craft and become the writer that you want to be. Because there is a point in time where you have these amazing characters and stories in your head, but they don't match your skill yet in terms of telling the story. And so I began my career writing YA, so young adult, and I started writing when I was 30. And I am now 45. So when I was 30, I started writing. I was on maternity leave with my daughter because I used to be a lawyer, actually. And it was while I was on maternity leave that I had some time to read books again. And I know it sounds a little bit strange because having an infant takes so much time and energy, but my job at a big international law firm was absolutely bonkers. The hours were, I didn't have a life. And so it was the first time where I was like, oh, I have this wonderful little human that I made. And also when she's napping, I can read a book. And I remembered how much I loved books. And actually, I thought, I used to like writing when I was younger, when I was a kid, when I was in elementary school, junior high, high school. I just loved writing. And then I stopped writing. So I thought, you know what? I think maybe I can do this. So I decided to give it a try. And I was really lucky because also I had my parents nearby in Southern California. And so I told them this dream and they said, hey, why don't we take care of the baby, our granddaughter, for a few hours every day? You can go to the local library and just give this a try. And so I started writing. And the first book that I wrote was a YA fantasy. And it had this great hook. It was about a time-traveling Russian prince from old imperial Russia, and he comes into modern times. And so I wrote it, and I thought it was amazing. I really, truly thought it was the best thing ever. And I immediately, as soon as I was done, sent it out to agents. And because it had a really great hook, I got requests for full manuscripts right away. And I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to be a millionaire by next year. This is the age of Twilight. So I really, really believe that I was so super talented, obviously, that I was going to make it big right away. The problem was, like I said, my skills for writing the stories were not matched with the actual story yet. So even though the concept was really interesting, I very quickly started getting rejections from agents. So I loved writing though. I really disliked being a lawyer. And there's nothing against people who actually enjoy the profession of being attorneys. It just was never for me. I was a literature major in college, and I ended up becoming a lawyer because I didn't want to be a literature professor because I'm just not an academic. And so I never felt like I fit in as an attorney. And when I found writing, it was the feeling that you wake up every day excited, just absolutely excited to do this thing that you've just discovered, this magic where you take seemingly random letters and then you craft them into words and then you make them sentences and then you invent people and places out of nothing. How amazing is that? So I wanted to keep doing it. So because of that, I bullheadedly decided to plow ahead and try writing another manuscript. But before that, I decided, okay, I need to learn how to be a better writer. And so I studied. I devoured everything I could online. And this is important to know. Even though I had a literature degree, it was only reading other people's books and writing essays about them. It was not in creative writing. I was self-taught as a writer because I didn't do that in college. Maybe I wrote a short story or something in high school, like a lot of us do, but I didn't have any formal training. I don't have an MFA. So basically, I got to this stage where my first manuscript got all these rejections. I wanted to write something new. I read everything I could on the internet. I bought books on craft, how to write the beginnings of book, how to write, how to create, how to do world building, all sorts of like tips and tricks. And there's so many different ways that people write that I was learning, okay, I am this kind of writer and not this kind of writer. Some people really like the craft books that teach them like all the nitty gritty steps. And some people are more like, oh, what is the feel of the world? Tap into those emotions. So I was figuring out where I was. So by that point then, I thought, okay, I've studied so much. Now I know all the aspects of craft. I know all the elements that make a perfect character. So now I'm going to write this next book. So I had a new idea, wrote a new manuscript, and queried to that one with agents. And that one did not get as far because I think what happened was it became so technical. I was so focused on the nuts and bolts of building a story. It had no soul. And so that was, I basically overcorrected. And so then I decided, okay, let's move on. And this is, I think, something that I'm good at, is that I'm really good at throwing things away or walking away from them when I've decided that they don't work. And I do wish that more writers had that ability, because I think sometimes we hold on too long to an idea and we just keep hammering away at it without being able to step back and objectively say, you know what, this one's not working. But I have faith in myself as a writer that I will figure it out, right? And that I can have another idea, and then you move on and you write something new. And every time you do that, you're getting better and better at what you do. So with the third manuscript, I was able to kind of meld that soul of storytelling that I originally had, that pure excitement, but with the skills that I had now learned, right, on how to craft a good novel. And that's the book that I got my first agent with. And so that's, if we're keeping count, that's manuscript number 3. So at this point, I was writing contemporary YA. It was social justice kind of issues. It was a little bit before its time, because at that point, the market was very small. And now if you look at the YA market, that's kind of like, that's what has been really popular for the last few years. But, I like to say I'm a pioneer. But unfortunately, being before your time means that publishers don't want to buy your book. So I worked with that agent. He tried to sell those rights to publishers. He could not get anyone to bite. But I think honestly, too, my skill level wasn't quite there yet, And so in the meantime, while he's doing that, I tried to keep busy by writing some more. And that's my biggest recommendation when you're waiting on whether or not your book is going to be picked up by a publishing house, do something else, because otherwise you will make yourself crazy checking your email all the time. So I wrote some more. At some point, he had sent it out to maybe 30, 45 editors and gotten so many no's on my third manuscript. And I said, okay, you know what? Maybe it's time to set this aside. Here's another one, And so we did that for several manuscripts. And I ended up writing 5 manuscripts while he was my agent. And some of them, as soon as I wrote the first draft, I knew that it wasn't good. I knew that there was just this is not going to hold up to revision. The first draft was already too thin and I didn't know what else to add to it. So I would say, okay, let's move on. Let's take whatever good ideas I can from that and we'll make a different story. So he ended up trying to sell, I think, a total of 3 different books to publishers out of those 5, and just none of them were working. And by then I was starting to get really discouraged. And I thought, maybe I think I'm better than I am. Maybe I'm actually supposed to be a practical person and I should go back to law. Maybe I'm not that creative. I have some ideas, but perhaps this is not what's meant to be for me, and maybe my skills are better suited for writing contracts and less imagination. So I was about to quit. And I had some friends who I'd made along the way. I'd been going to writing conferences, and the thing that I always recommend to people when they're looking for friends who are writers and critique partners is don't try to become friends with the people who have already, quote unquote, made it. You look at them and you think, how come all the published authors are friends with each other? Well, the secret is that they all met each other before any of them were published. They all met each other before they had agents. And that's who my friends were. And we all met each other, like I would say maybe 2010 or so. And this was 2014 now when I was about ready to quit. And yes, that's 8 manuscripts I've written, right? By this point. So like I said, I can write fast and I'll throw things away if I'm like, that's not good. And that's why I had so many manuscripts already. So I was about to quit, and my friends then had started to get agents, and some of them were about to be published. And they said, Evelyn, like, we've been through this journey, right? Like, you're literally just like one step behind us, and we think that your time is about to come. Don't quit. Just try it again. And so I thought, okay, fine. I will write one more story. And I'm going to stop caring so much about what I think editors want, what I think the market wants. I'm just going to write whatever I want. And if it doesn't work, then I quit. And I think because I gave myself that permission, and because I'd spent all that time practicing and leveling up every single time with my writing craft, what happened was the book that became The Crown's Game. And that was my first book deal. So manuscript number 9. Okay. Oh, but before that, I decided to leave my agent. He only specifically worked on contemporary books. And so it was kind of a scary thing. You know, you get an agent and you kind of hope that they're your agent forever. You feel like, oh, I finally made it. I'm safe. And especially after you've been working with an agent for a few years, I had a safety net, right? Like I could write manuscripts and then throw them away, and it was fine because I knew that eventually I'd write something good and he would be there for me and he would sell it. So to say, hey, I've written a thing. I'm sorry. I don't think that this is going to be for you, and I'm going to go find someone else. I mean, he was heartbroken. I was heartbroken. We liked each other a lot. You know, he wanted to continue representing me. He's like, let me give it a try. And I said, you're not a fantasy guy. Like, I'm sorry. Like, you've never sold a fantasy book. You have one client, you know, who sold one book that was like a horror book, basically. So we parted ways, but I had faith in this manuscript. I was like, okay, this is kind of like my entire soul, everything that I care about and I find interesting in a book, and I think it's good. So I queried again, and this time I had 3 offers very quickly, because I had just gotten better, right? But it was a lot of perseverance, and it was a lot of patience with my craft, and a lot of doubt, but also some kind of strange delusional faith in myself, which turned out to not be delusional. It just needed time. So I signed with my agent. That was with Writer's House. And so then the book became The Crown's Game. And that sold to one of the big 5 publishers in a 2-book deal. I'd only thought I'd write 1, but they wanted 2. And it was a 6-figure 2-book deal. And it was kind of like, this was the dream. This is what I was working towards. And so that's how my career began, that duology. And then they bought another duology from me. So that was a total of 4 YA novels. And then after that, I decided to leave that agent. This is a very long story, but you know, I think it's kind of important to see the long arc of a career and the different points, the inflection points, the ups and downs, you know, and the fact that what you really want is to have a long career, and that things will change, but you can roll with it, right? Like as long as you let yourself know that things will change, you can handle it. So I left that agent because by that point I felt like sometimes, you know, it's like friendships or relationships. Like there's a certain time when you're right for each other, and then you kind of outgrow each other. And so we parted amicably. And then I found my current agent, Tao Lei, with Sandra Dijkstra Agency, and we just really get each other. And she has done book deals for me for 8 more books, I believe, in total. Some of them aren't published yet. But yeah, so then I wrote another YA. I co-wrote YA, 3 Kisses, 1 Midnight, with some of my friends. And that was just a super fun experience. We wrote it during the pandemic. And so we thought, let's write something fun and happy. And so it was such a nice relief. But at the same time, I started to think about, like, I wanted to write for adults. And so I started reading more fiction, just general fiction that was for adults, because that's what my agent said. She's like, you know, if you want to change genres, I think you can do it. I think you're talented, but you have to learn that audience. You can't just write YA, but with characters who are older. It doesn't work that way. So I did that, and I started writing books for adults. I've also, in the meantime, I took some work for hire from Disney. They approached me and said, like, hey, we would like to invent a new Disney princess. Would you like to do that? I was like, yes, I would like to do that. But she was going to be young, so it was going to be for 8 to 12-year-olds. And so I did that. And we can talk about, you know, building a career with a mix of your original work and work for hire. My partnership with Netflix was kind of somewhere in between that. So, anyway, the last couple of years have been amazing and wild. It is the culmination of all these other years of hard work. And I think I'll wrap up the whole career story by saying it's really important for aspiring writers not to look at where a successful author is now and think, I need to jump from point A to point, I don't know, M, right? Like halfway through the alphabet, the American alphabet, English alphabet. There's so many steps along the way, and there's just a lot of grit and hustle and perseverance, but there's also so much joy and satisfaction that comes with being in a creative career. So anyway, that was a very long story, but that's who I am and how I got to where I am now.
Evelyn Skye is an incredible example of what we can build when we wholeheartedly believe in our vision. Want to meet her live? Then join my online writing club. You can meet every inspiring writer I interview inside my membership. There's one thing, or like 2 books I'd like to talk with you now. And this is like also about this like 2-dimensional aspect of being a writer and writing a book. So there's always a story around the book or the plot you're sharing. So we talked about your first date in a bookstore and the proposal. I know that your hubby almost died a few months later. So I know that you wrote him a book about reincarnation and soulmates across times and love no matter what. And this book is The 100 Loves of Juliet, which I really, really love. And you know that I'm also a sucker for here, although also like German love novels. Could you share a bit more about this book before we come to your latest one? Because for me, when I went through your list of books, this was like the one I said, okay, I have to put this on the list and read it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I think The 100 Loves of Julia and what happened with me and Tom and his health were kind of like that. That was the big shift for me from why I left YA to start writing for adults. I'd been sort of thinking about it already, but then I had to almost it was like a shock to the system when you find the love of your life and now you think this is the happily ever after. But then 8 months after we got married, he was diagnosed with a degenerative lung disease that's actually has no cure. And it was based on this really super rare genetic mutation that he has. So he was diagnosed in February of 2020. March of 2020, actually end of February. He didn't tell me because I had a book coming out. So I had Cloak of Night. It was my 4th book. So book 2 of my 2nd duology that was coming out. I was going on tour. And we had known he was sick, and the doctors had taken a long time trying to figure out what the heck was going on, because the end conclusion was that it was super rare, and that's why they didn't think of it first. But anyway, he had this diagnosis, and he didn't tell me because he wanted me to enjoy being on tour, because that's the kind of person he is. And then it was 2019. Sorry. So it was 2019. I was on tour, and anyway, I came back. So it was February. Gosh, my dates that whole period of my life is just kind of this awful blur. So I was on tour for Circle of Shadows, actually. So that was book 3. So book 1 of that 2nd duology. And so I came back from tour, and he told me the diagnosis. And so it was so devastating. We'd only been married for 8 months. And so we started planning things like, we need to live as much life as we can right now. And they had said with this disease, sometimes it takes 10 years for your lungs to kind of degenerate and basically fail. But it seemed like things were going a little bit faster for him. So we planned this big trip across Europe, and then we had a safari planned for later that summer. We never got to go on that safari because by August, his lungs stopped working. So we had to cancel the safari. He was living in the hospital because he was on oxygen, the home oxygen machine that he had been tethered to in our apartment. He had this sad little diameter that he'd go in because of the machine. It was no longer strong enough because he just needed the high powered oxygen at the hospital. So he was living in the hospital and waiting for a transplant. And so that was a really, really rough time. You never know if you're going to get an organ donor match. Luckily he did. So like, I'm going to fast forward to the sad part of the story because I don't really like to dwell on it. But yeah, so like when we're so thankful for the organ donor's family, obviously something very tragic happened to them. But this was such an incredible, gift to us. And so basically to me, that was like, it's a second chance, right? It's a reincarnation. We get this entire second chance at life. So I wrote The 100 Loves of Juliet, which is right there behind me. And it is a story it's a kind of a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, where Romeo has lived all this time, but Juliet keeps dying in every single lifetime. And she never remembers who she is. And so when he finds her again this time, he's been trying to hide from her reincarnation. Like he's thinking like if I hide away in this remote Alaskan fishing village, she will never find me. But fate has other ideas, right? It's kind of like if you believe in soulmates, you're gonna find each other. So they cross paths, and he's just like, I can't watch her die again, and it comes from that feeling I had when Tom was sick, where you only have a little bit of time with someone. Like, how do you live your life then? You can choose to enjoy every one of those small moments, or you can put up a wall, so that you don't feel anything because you're too scared to face it. So that's kind of what that book is about. But then, because I'm such an optimistic and hopeful person, they realize that this is actually, they should live in the present, right? And she's very hopeful. She's like, I think we can break this curse. And so the story is about them and how they live. And it is the way that Tom and I live, because lung transplant is still very fragile. But he's coming up on his 5-year anniversary. He's doing great. So we're just living every day, enjoying life to the fullest and feeling very blessed.
Oh, I'm so happy for you, and I wish you all the best in your
Thank
hobby,
you.
Evelyn, really, for the next 50 years plus. And I also know that your latest book, 1 year ago in Spain, is also about second chances. I think the main characters, Claire's job and life stress, I guess, is based on yours.
Yes, she's a lawyer.
When you were a mergers and acquisitions attorney
Yes.
at a giant international firm. You told us about this. Do you want to tell us a bit more about this new book, 1 year ago?
Yeah, so the premise is that there's a woman, she's a high-powered lawyer. She falls in love with a Spanish artist who is kind of just chaotic. He's the complete opposite of her. He lives his life with so much passion and in the moment, and he has this incredible zest for life, which is actually what my husband Tom, he's always lived that way, even before he was sick, that he just... to him, life is so amazing, right? Let's do all the things. And she's very, very tidy and buttoned up. And so it's a little bit like us. I'm making fun of myself a little bit because she has all these rules in her apartment about like, well, you take off your shoes, and obviously your keys go here. Why would they go here? And he's trying so hard to like keep up with all her rules. And so that's very much me and Tom. But he falls into a coma after an accident in Spain, and she, has to leave her job in New York to come be with him in Spain in the hospital. But the thing is, his soul starts wandering, and she's the only one that can see his soul. And so in order to reunite his soul with his actual body so they can have a real happily ever after, she has to make his soul, who is forgotten, who doesn't know who she is, fall back in love with her. And so it's about them going through Spain and having these dates while she's also trying to balance his family and like seem like a responsible girlfriend, at the hospital. So it's very a hopeful book. I know my books sound kind of sad because I'm like, no, people are dying. He's in a coma. But I am just such an incorrigible optimist that I really feel like my books are full of hope and joy. And so, yeah, it's a magical, little bit of magic, not very magical, like trip to Spain. And it's full of love and my love of Spanish culture. I've been studying Spanish for several years now. I worked with my Spanish editor and publishing house actually on 1 year ago in Spain to make sure that I got cultural references right, that the Spanish was not like Latin American Spanish, that was like Spain Spanish. So it was just a really fun project to kind of hatch the idea myself, but then also collaborate with them to make sure it felt authentic.
I'd like to dive a bit deeper into the publishing industry.
Yeah.
So I know that you were published traditionally, which is different from a lot of other writers who are probably now listening and watching this. how would you see like self-publishing compared to traditional publishing at the moment?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts about this. So, settle in because I'm probably going to talk for a while. So I think that there is, so I'm going to start with the important thing is to know what you want for yourself. And I don't mean just I want to write a book and I want it published. I think you need to be very honest in analyzing who you are, the things that motivate you, and what will ultimately make you happy. So, for example, one of the questions that I think we talked about maybe on email before we decided to do this interview was about like New York Times bestseller list and how would you become a New York Times bestseller. And so what you need to know about that, and I'll talk more about the bestseller list, is that that's almost impossible if you're self-published, and it's because it's of the way that the New York Times works. And so if you look into your own, your heart, and you're like, you know what? That is what I want out of this career. That is the thing that will truly make me happy. And if I don't give myself a shot at that, I will feel like I didn't succeed in what I set out to do. Then you need to try to be traditionally published. You need to do what I did, where you are frankly going to get rejected a lot, over and over and over again. And maybe, a lot of your books you write, your manuscripts will just never be published, right? So it's not the right road for everyone. And this is why I say it's so important to ask yourself, what is it that drives you and that will ultimately make you feel fulfilled? And it might not be the answer you think that it should be, right? Because I had to ask myself that question. And I didn't like that my true answer was, I really want to have a 6-figure deal from a big 5 publisher, and I want to be a New York Times bestseller. Especially, I think for women, it's sometimes hard to admit big ambitions. We're supposed to say things like, oh gosh, I'm just so happy to have this opportunity, And I think that there's definitely a place for that too. And I do want to emphasize, this is not, my dream is not everyone's dream, right? And I think there's so many definitions of success, creative fulfillment. But when I looked at myself, I had to say, I wish that wasn't the answer. I wish I didn't need external validation, but the reality is I do. And that's both a flaw and I guess a strange strength for me, because then it motivates me to do these things and go through many years of suffering and rejection. So that's one thing. The other side is if you're what matters to me the most is the pure artistic creation of a story. And then I just have to have it out in the world. I want readers to read it. I don't care if I get a moniker like New York Times. I don't care about that kind of commercial, validation or whatever. If that is what drives you, then you need to go, something like self-publishing. And I think that those are two ends of the spectrum. So there's, traditional publishing on one side, self-publishing on the other side, and then hybrid in the middle. So I definitely want to talk about that too. But just going back to this idea of thinking about yourself, I do really like Enneagrams. And I think that if anyone else is interested in Enneagrams, I think it's EnneagramInstitute.com or .org. They have this great description of the 9 types of Enneagrams, and you don't even have to take an online test. You can just read those and say, hey, which one seems more like me? And the reason I like them is because unlike a Myers-Briggs personality test, which can change based on how you're feeling that day, the Enneagram kind of gets to what are your core motivations. And I'm an Enneagram 3, so I am driven by achievement. I have other friends, a lot of writers and artists are Enneagram 4s. They care just about that art, that pureness of the art, about doing things that are different, and for them, the path is going to be different. They would feel really stilted on the path that I went through, because I think about the business a lot. I think about what is a commercial concept that will sell? Because frankly, a big 5 publisher, they're not going to pay you 6 figures if they can't make a big profit on your book, right? If they don't think it can sell a lot of copies, which means that it has to be a commercial concept. And for my friends who are Enneagram 4s, who are these very pure artists, they really bristle against that. They're I want to write whatever comes up to in my mind, and I want to create this thing, and then I want to put it out there. And maybe it's more niche, but they're going to find a niche that loves their story. And so we make different decisions for our careers, and as long as you know what's true for your heart and what drives you, that's then I think that you'll be happy in a creative career. And it's when you try to shoehorn yourself into something that's not quite you, that's when people start feeling resentful about the industry and they start kind of hating the writing itself. And it's so sad because that's why we started, right? Because we love telling stories. So quick water break, and then I'm going to talk more. So before I get to traditional publishing, self-publishing, and then the hybrid in between, I want to point out, so the New York Times bestseller list, I had mentioned that it's not, I think I mentioned it's really hard to make it as self-publishing. And the reason for that is because it's not purely based on sales numbers. And so there are a lot of self-published books that actually sell more than the books that are on the New York Times bestseller list. But that's because the New York Times editorial board, or the book review board, they have a secret formula that they use. And so this is really kind of a curated list that is a combination of book sales and the kinds of books that the New York Times editors decide that they want to have on their list. So if you think, oh, well, I'm just going to self-publish my book and it's so good and it will make it onto the list, the reality is it's 1 in a million, maybe more than 1 in a million. So of course there's always exceptions, but the New York Times editors, you can call them snobs. They prefer literary fiction. Sometimes the stuff they pick, I look at the list and I'm like that's definitely not what all of Americans are reading right now, but it's been on the list, for like, I don't know, 10 weeks or something in a row. It's partially because that's what they think, the subscribers of the New York Times newspaper tend to read these kinds of books, and therefore they want to showcase, hey, these are the top 10 or 15 books that we think you, our subscribers, are likely to like. So that's kind of a clarification and why I said that if you want to become a New York Times bestseller, you basically have to go traditional, because then you have an actual shot at it.
And do you know about a self-published author who got a spot on the list?
It does happen, because sometimes books become so popular that the New York Times just, in recent years, they've decided, okay, this is embarrassing. We cannot actually ignore this. But I do think that that's a pretty recent development, but it is still rare. What I see more often is if a self-published author starts doing really well, they will get picked up by a traditional publisher that then can help them with wider distribution. And, they get into the Walmarts and the Targets, as well as all the independent bookstores across the country. And then that's usually when they hit the list. So I do still think that for most, like 99% of the cases, you need a traditional publisher. And it doesn't have to be a big five. It can be a smaller press. Like, look at what happened with Fourth Wing and Entangled. Entangled is a small press. They're not one of the big five, but they are still kind of in that traditional bucket, that they could put a book onto the New York Times. So that's that clarification.
Then you would still recommend that we start self-publishing our books if we can't find an agent or we can't find a publisher. So we would start self-publishing our books, similar to what you did. And then at some point, improving our craft to a point where we could then try it over and over again. At some point, we would then, in the best case, get an agent, find a traditional publisher who would actually publish us. And then, if our dream and our goal is to become, a New York Times bestselling author, this would be the way to go then.
Yeah, I think so, except I don't know about the starting point. I think for some people, it makes sense to start self-publishing first. But I think for some people, it makes more sense to do what I did, which is just put stuff aside and wait. And part of that is because I can look back now on those early manuscripts and I can see how much better I got. At the time, I couldn't see because everything's clear in hindsight, right? At the time, I was writing the very best that I could, but now I'm actually really glad that none of those were published because I don't want them out there. It's to me, I'm like, oh, well, now it's it's not embarrassing because you should never be embarrassed by the art that you're making. But I personally want my very best out there. But at some point along the way, you start publishing, right? Whether you're with a traditional publisher or you decide to self-publish, you're going to get better no matter what. Pick up your favorite author's books, their most recent one, and then go back to the first one and the third one that they wrote. They're getting better all the time, right? And that's kind of what we want as well. We never want to stagnate as artists. So I think it's really up to you whether or not you want your early work out there. And there's also the argument that if you self-publish early, when you self-publish, you have to hustle to get that book out there. And so you're spending more time on the publicity and the marketing, and that takes away from your time with writing more books. So it's really a choice because what I love about self-publishing. And the way the publishing industry now is that you can publish books, you can start making money. You don't have to wait for a gatekeeper. You don't have to do what I did, where you wait so many years. So yes, I knew I wanted to go traditional publishing because of my personality, my Enneagram type, etc. But also back when I started getting published in the mid 2010s, so my first book came out in 2016, which means I, like signed a book deal, I think in 2015 and all that kind of stuff. If you were self-published first, traditional publishers would sometimes look down on you, and they would look at your book sales and they'd say, well, clearly this person can't sell books because it's obviously harder to sell books if you're self-published. And they'd say, oh, this person only sold 200 copies of their book. They'll never make it as a traditionally published author, and therefore your career is dead. That's not true anymore. Now, traditional publishers, and agents, they scout self-publishing. There's so many agents and publishers who are scouting self-published authors to say, hey, where can we find someone new? Scarlett St. Clair, who I interviewed on my podcast, she started out in self-publishing and she made it big. I mean, she said she was making like $10,000 a month, and traditional publishers were approaching her and she was saying, okay, what can you do for me? And none of them had anything better for her, so she just kept saying no until finally Bloom, who really understands the self-published romance market, they did something great for her. And so now, she's sold literally millions of copies of her book worldwide.
Yeah, I love this story because this is all about practicing in public. If I wouldn't have started in December 2020, then I wouldn't be here today talking with you. I guess, Evelyn, you want to add some more about like traditional publishing and
Yeah. So I think that, two more things I want to say. So like traditional publishing on one side, self-publishing on the other. It used to be that traditional publishing was only the big five in New York and then no one else could make a difference. There's so many small presses now. So that's kind of like the in-between in the spectrum that are out there, who some of them function basically like the big five publishers. Well, they'll do everything for you. There's other ones which sometimes people call them hybrid, where they'll help you with editing and some publicity and marketing, but you also have to do more for yourself. So you're not doing everything yourself like in self-publishing, but they'll help you with some of it, like the formatting, all that kind of stuff that, like, honestly, I don't want to do. And some people are such good business people and they know how to do the formatting. They know how to like set up like Instagram ads. And I'm just like, I don't know, someone else do it for me, which is why like I'm on the far end of the spectrum, the do everything for me side. But also, I think the term hybrid is being used in two different ways, and so it's a little bit confusing. Sometimes people look at these like smaller presses who are doing that in between of self-publishing and traditional, and they call that hybrid, and that makes sense. There's other people who use the term hybrid for building a hybrid career where you are doing both traditionally publishing and self-publishing. So you're not doing the in-between with the smaller presses. You're doing kind of like, I have friends, so I have an interview coming up with Sarah Rash and Beth Revis. So Beth Revis, she's doing both. She has traditionally published deals with big five publishers, but she is also self-publishing books, like one a year now, because that way she has a little more control. So with traditionally publishing with the big five, you get an advance. And that's great because that helps you live. They give you money before your book is even published, And self-publishing, you don't make money until you hustle and you sell every single book, right? But with traditional publishing, you kind of sometimes don't have control. You don't know what they're going to do with marketing and publicity. You don't know where they're going to send the book, or if they're going to delay the schedule. And with self-publishing, you have that control. So she's decided to create this kind of hybrid career. So maybe I'll call it blended, so it's different from like what people think of for hybrid publishing. She has this blended career. And again, I really love the publishing landscape now because it allows writers to build the kind of careers that they want. And I really like to emphasize that it's great that you have these options and you should take advantage of them. In the past, long ago, it was looked down if you self-publish because people thought like, oh, it means you couldn't like quote unquote make it, with a big publisher. And that's not the case anymore. Now it's really a choice that you're making for yourself based on your personality, based on the kinds of books that you write. If you write something super niche or with a smaller audience than like a big giant corporation will take on because, again, they're a big corporation, right? They've got their profit and loss balance sheets and stuff like that. It's a different kind of math. if you have that kind of story, you can put it out there and you can make money, right? And so I really think it's great that writers can take these opportunities, and you can write on Substack, right? That's a different income stream. I really think that it's wonderful, and that writers should think about different ways to use their skills, in different, not just saying, I'm only going to write one novel and that's how I'm going to make a living. Don't put that creative pressure on yourself, right? Like, take all these different avenues, build the career that you want.
And how important do you think, Evelyn, is marketing? Because you mentioned with the traditional publisher, they help you with your, I guess, then TikTok, Instagram, and everything. But still, I have the feeling it is still very personable, this whole thing. So I have the feeling when I'm watching you on TikTok or on Instagram or on Substack, this is all coming from you. So how much are you doing for your books, and how much is your publisher doing for you in regard to marketing?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it varies from book to book, even with the same author. And so, for example, with like The 100 Loves of Juliet, my publisher did so much. I mean, they put together these incredible boxes to send out to influencers online, and it had, it had that book, it had Romeo and Juliet, it had like these little mini Nutellas that had like the names of the characters on them, because Nutella is important, which, that was something that was actually my idea, but then they followed through on it and they made it happen. And they did partnerships with other companies, to do Romeo and Juliet themed giveaways, and it was amazing. And then with 1 year ago in Spain, like sometimes what happens is once you have a book that does well, your publisher is kind of like, okay, cool. So that author, they just know what they're doing. So we'll just let them do their own thing. So they did do some things. They sent out, galleys or arcs to influencers. They printed character art, but I paid for the character art myself, but they printed and they mailed them out because they have all the contacts. So I think, but like you said, they do some things like on their social media, on their account, but everything I'm doing on my social media and on my Substack, it's all me. And so that is, I think, we no longer live in a world where if you're with a traditional publisher, you could just only write a book and they'll take care of everything for you. That's not how it works. There's actually so much that is put on the author, no matter how big your deal is. Unless you signed $1 million deal, you're doing a lot of the work yourself. And it's important to build that platform. And I love Substack for that. Like, I feel like as a writer, this is the place that works the best for me. It's hard for me to come up with video content. I don't understand TikTok at all. It's too fast. It's too chaotic. Instagram, I sort of understand. It's still like it takes significant effort to come up with ideas for video content. Substack, I can just sit down and write, and I can just do podcasts like this with you where we're talking about writing and it goes out and there's a transcript and people can read it or they can listen. It's such a beautiful place to build a platform.
I'd like to talk a bit more about like what it's actually like to come to this point where you make a living writing, and how it's like to be now a very well paid published author.
Yeah, I think that this is a really important conversation to have because there's a lot of fantasy out there about author life, and then not enough people talk about the reality. So as you pointed out, my husband has a full-time job, and that is a steady income. We live in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is extraordinarily expensive. So I will be perfectly honest that my income as a writer would not be enough to live on here, because even though I get a six-figure deal, the way that these are paid out is they're paid out in 4 milestones over years. And so on my Substack at creativeinspiredhappy.com, there's a section called writing advice. And in there, I have a piece. I'll send it to you. So if you want to link it in the article, in the episode notes for this show, it's about how we are paid in traditional publishing. And it breaks down what are royalties, what are sales escalators, what are payment milestones. So for example, let's say you get, like $100,000. We'll use that as a really round number for like your dream, like, oh my gosh, I got a 6-figure deal. And everyone's like, oh, this is so amazing. I'm rich. You're not rich because they break it up into $25,000 chunks each time. And this is before you give 15% to your agent. And this is before you pay taxes on it. Okay. So it's not actually that much money.
I see.
So you get $25,000 when you sign the contract. And then the milestones are different for each deal. Your agent negotiates that, but typical will be $25,000 when you sign the contract, $25,000 when you have done all of your revisions with your editor and you turn something in that is pretty much done. So that's called acceptance and delivery and acceptance. And then So that's usually like a year after you've signed your contract, or maybe a little shorter, depending on how fast you work. Then you get $25,000 when your book is actually published in hardcover. Okay, so that's a year later because traditional publishing takes a long time. And then you get the last $25,000 a year after that when the paperback book comes out, at least in the United States. The books that get published with bigger book deals tend to be hardcover first for a year or sometimes more, and then paperback after that, because publishers, they make more money on a hardcover book than on a paperback. The profit margin is bigger. And since they have paid you, let's say $100,000, they need to be able to sell a lot of books, right, to make that money back. So you're getting basically, let's say $25,000 a year for, and again, pre 15% agent cut and pre-tax for this book. So six-figure deal does not make you rich. So what you ideally do is that you sign a multi-book contract, and so you have kind of like, everything gets staggered. So you sign one contract, you get paid for this book the next year, but you have another book coming in, so you end up getting paid a little bit more. But it's not pretty. And that's why I really advocate for writers, if you want to make it as a career only with writing, to have different income streams, like write on Substack, see if you can do paid subscriptions, take on freelance work, do editing, or like, do coaching like you're doing with like teaching other writers how to, build their platforms on Substack. There's no shame in that. I mean, it's a freelance career. And it's never been easy to be an artist. There's no time in history where it's been easy to be an artist, and I like to pretend that my husband is basically my patron, like back in like the Renaissance, if you were like a painter, you could have a wealthy patron, and he's not wealthy, but you'd have somebody who supported your work, right? And that's basically what he's doing. He's got the healthcare and all that, those important things. So that's the reality. But I don't want to discourage people from doing it. I just want to be realistic, and because I think that there is that dream that people put too much hope into, like, oh my gosh, one day I'm going to get this deal and then I'll be set for life. And that's not how it happens. But I'm still so happy to not be a lawyer anymore. I mean, with a lawyer, I had a very steady, high-paying salary, and I could have just done that. But money is not everything in life. Like I said, you don't get rich being an author. It's very rare. I know, honestly, I mean, that, like I said, I thought I'd be an instant millionaire and I'd write, some Twilight success. And that's what kind of got me into it at first. I thought, oh, I can do this creative thing and I'll be rich, and that's not the case. But it is, like you said, it's about freedom. It's about being able to live a creative life and to be able to tell stories. And it's not always going to be as comfortable financially as if you had a steady job, but every day I get to wake up and do what I do, like how cool is that yeah, my husband and I, he'll laugh at me because he'll come into my office is like a corner of my bedroom, and he'll come into the bedroom sometimes and I'm asleep on the bed in the middle of the day, and he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I was working. I was actually, I was at my computer. I got a little stuck. So I thought I'd lie down and brainstorm, because sometimes just being away from the screen and having that quiet space, it works, right? But sometimes I accidentally fall asleep. But, or I go for walks, and it seems like I'm doing nothing because it's like I just go for a walk in the middle of the day, but I'm working. Like I get great ideas when I go for walks and I don't have a podcast on or music. It's just me, no phone, and that's when things untangle in my head. And I just think, this is my life. Like you said, it's freedom. I get to go and go on meditative walks, and that's part of my job. How cool is that?
And do you have other income streams besides being a fiction writer?
I'm making my money from my books and my husband's normal job, and that's it. So like you said, yeah, 100% of my Substack subscriptions go to scholarships for aspiring writers. It's really important to me because we have a $1,000 scholarship for anyone who was like me, you're mid-career, and like you, where you're doing something else and you're like, I just dream of being a writer full time. And so here's $1,000 for you to go and take classes, and I just did, before that, I did a $500 Substack Emerging Talent Award. for people to use for things like childcare. Just to, like you said, you need time, you need babysitting, right? So I'm trying to do everything I can to support writers. And then for high school students, we have something coming up for in the fall. That's $2,500 for them to use towards college tuition for anyone who's a young writer as well, because I think it's so important to support creativity. It is such an important part of the human experience. And I think sometimes people get too focused on how do I go to university and have a major that will make me money immediately. And while it's important to live, I don't want to de-emphasize having, the ability to like pay your bills and all that. It's also really important for us to be creative. And I think also the other thing I do on my Substack that I think is important is that you don't have to put all of your eggs in the basket of a creative career. You can have just a little bit of creativity in your life. You can have a normal day job doing marketing for a healthcare company and still find these creative outlets. And so that's why I like to do like a 5-minute creativity challenge. I'll post a photo and I say, you don't even have to write if you don't want to. You can just tell yourself the story about this photo, right? Like make up a story
about this bird.
Yeah. And it's just a really good reminder that, it's not all or nothing, right? Like little bits, little sparks are important. And maybe it builds into something bigger and maybe it doesn't, but that's okay too.
I read somewhere that you said, pre-orders are dead somehow. Mm-hmm. Still, I think that a lot of New York Times bestseller authors, for instance, there's Jen Gottlieb. I love her. This is her book, Be Seen. I also, have it here. I know what she did was a lot of pre-ordering. So she had a sales funnel and everything. So she wanted to do a lot of pre-sales, and she even gave away some books and so on and so on. And that's why I'm very curious about your take on pre-selling your book.
Yeah, okay, so 2 points about that. One, and if I forget, you have to remind me. So one is why pre-orders matter for the New York Times bestseller list, and the other is why pre-orders don't work anymore. Okay, so the first reason why, if you're aiming for the New York Times bestseller list, you do care about pre-orders is because anything before your release date that is pre-ordered, the stores don't ring that up as a sale until your release date. So let's say you can sell like 100 pre-orders, or let's get really excited. Let's say you can somehow pre-order 2,000 pre-orders. All of those count on day one when your book is out, plus whatever you sell in that first week. So the New York Times, they take your sales numbers from Sunday to Saturday, and that's what counts as 1 week. And again, they curate which books they want, but sales numbers are a part of it. And so let's say they think, okay, these are the kinds of books that we think we want for our list. Which ones of those sold the most within this Sunday through Saturday time frame? In the United States, books always come out on Tuesday. I have no idea why, but they do. So you actually have a short week that week to get your sales only from Tuesday to Saturday to be one of the top 10 or 15, depending on which list you're on, books. But all your pre-orders count for that first Tuesday. So now you have your, let's say 2,000, I think is what I said, that you got from pre-orders, plus whatever you sell from Tuesday to Saturday. And all of a sudden, let's say you have this huge week and you've sold like 10,000 books. And then, woo, now you're on the New York Times bestseller list. So that's why people who are aiming for the list, they care about pre-orders. And that's why we also get upset if stores start releasing your book early, when people are like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited about Evelyn Skye's next book and I found it in the store and it's like not even supposed to come out until like 2 weeks from now. And I'm like, oh God, no. Because if they get that book and they have it in their hands, that means the store actually rang it up early and it doesn't count anymore. It doesn't wait, right, until that Tuesday of release week. Anyway, so that is why we care about pre-orders. It was, however, so much more effective in the past. So when I first started publishing, that was still a possibility to get people to pre-order. Nowadays, the way that social media has developed, the way that people are on their phones, the way we live in a world of instant gratification, people don't like to pre-order. If they want to buy something, they want it right now. Like if I want a book, I want it on my Kindle right away, or I want Amazon to have it on my doorstep tomorrow. And so it's really hard to convince people to buy a book that is not going to come out for 9 months, or even in 1 month, Sometimes if it's like a week away, you can convince people to pre-order, maybe 2 weeks. And I say all this and I still try to have a pre-order campaign. I do, but I don't expect much from it. And I think that that's probably the right balance, because I do have a publicity calendar for what I try to hype up, because you don't want to just show up on Tuesday release day and be like, I have a new book, and no one's ever heard of it. You want to be priming people, right? You want to get people excited. And so I'll do pre-order campaigns. I'll say, hey, if you pre-order for some of my books, if I feel like it. It depends on my energy. But if I have the energy, I'll say, okay, you can pre-order and you'll get these things. But I don't expect the same kinds of pre-order numbers I used to back in 2016. It's just the market is totally different now. So if for the Crowns game, I don't remember what my pre-order numbers are, but like, I mean, it's not like enormous, but let's say it was like, I don't know, 500 books or something. I don't expect 500 pre-orders anymore for my books, even though I'm the same writer, even though arguably I'm a lot more well-known, right? Like, I mean, I've worked with friggin' Netflix now. I just don't expect it. So I'll just put that out there. It's a nice to have. It's mostly for my true fans, the people who are like, I'm going to buy an Evelyn Skye book no matter what. It's like a little extra reward for them, and they get something extra, like, yay, they get a book plate, they get some character art, that kind of thing. And it's a nice gift for them, but I'm not going to stress. I actually don't even ask my publishers anymore what are the pre-order numbers, because I don't even care. It's like, it's not going to make a difference. They'll say, oh, you sold 25 or you sold 50. I have no idea what the number is, but it's not going to make a difference anymore for hitting the New York Times bestseller list. So that's why I don't stress about that. But I do, like I said, I have a publicity calendar. I will also send you that link so that you can link to it in the episode notes, because it's kind of what to do on social media, whether you're self-published or traditionally published, to start building excitement about your book beforehand, but not overwhelming your readers when you don't have something for them to buy it, because they're going to get mad at you and then they're going to unfollow you. And then what's the point of you building that platform, right? So how to seed in some excitement, and then how to hit really hard once your book is actually available on the day that they can actually give you money, and then get it immediately, or like, within 2 days for Amazon Prime.
Hungry for more? Inside my online writing club, I help you start, grow, and monetize your writing. Join the fun and 8,000 like-minded writers right now. Evelyn, do you have a book club, Do you have a book club, something like this?
Yes, I do, actually. So on my Substack, we have the Creative Inspired Happy Book Club for writers and curious readers. And so every month we read a book, and we don't just talk about it like, oh, I liked it or didn't like it. It's about analyzing each book, the structure of it, why the plot worked, why the pacing, slowed down, why people have different opinions about the book. Maybe it was actually because at a certain point in the book, the genre changed and people were surprised. They didn't like that. Or, why do people all love this one character, but then like have mixed feelings about another one? So we kind of try to dissect it to figure out what worked. And it's kind of like, it's almost like studying book, but like less academic. Like, it's not to the level of being in a university and analyzing literature. It's not like a creative writing class, but it's a very relaxed kind of way to think about, hey, why did this work? And then what we always do, we do that for about half an hour. And then the second half hour is kind of like an AMA, like an Ask Me Anything, where people can ask me questions ahead of time and I'll prepare stuff, but you can also ask me while you're there. And then other writers can share what they're working on, what problems they might be facing. They can ask each other like, hey, has anyone ever had this problem with book publicity? Like, do you have any recommendations? So it's one of my favorite things that we do. And so that's also on, creativeinspiredhappy.com, which is my Substack.
But there, Evelyn, you are discussing the books of others.
Yes.
Are you also discussing your book?
No,
there? Your own.
My rule is that we do not read books of any members of our books, and that includes my own, because we want to be able to, we try to have these very conversations like driven by kindness, because we all know how hard it is to write a book, but it's frankly very hard to hear anyone dissect your book, even if they're mostly saying good things, but they might say, oh, but I didn't like this part, and like, oh, no one wants to hear that, right? So my rule is we don't read any of our own books, and if I pick a book that happens to be like your best friend, you can tell me and say, hey, can we not do that? Because I can't listen to that. And I'll say, sure, we'll change it. So that way also, it's just like, we can have a more open conversation about like how these books work.
Evelyn, another thing I know is that you had a release party.
Yes.
At one of your favorite tapas restaurants.
Yes.
And this is also a story that this is, how you got me as a super fan, because I loved it so much. It was like, if I were to publish a book, this would be my release party. And seeing you so happy with your friends and age, and then you had these tapas and sangria and non-alcoholic drinks and what else? And I love this playlist you had, I loved everything. So could you share a bit more about this release party, because I really loved it, as you can see.
Yeah, no, thank you. I do different kinds of release events. So sometimes I do a bookstore event and it's open to the public and I invite everyone in and I do a conversation with another author or one of my critique partners. We talk about the making of the book, and all that kind of stuff. And then I do traditional book signing where there's a line. And those are kind of like mini parties, because I have such a sweet tooth, I always bring something like cupcakes or a cake, or like for my very first book, I actually hired a pastry chef to make custom pastries that were inspired by the pastries that were in the book, because I had a pastry chef in my book as well. So that's like one kind of event is a bookstore event. And then this time I decided to do just a small private party with my friends. And part of that was because I had done so many bookstore events just recently, and I was a little bit burnt out, I'll be honest, with just kind of constantly putting myself out there. And I thought, I don't think I have it in me this time to kind of be to be author persona. And I'm always very genuine, but I'm a social introvert. And so what that means is when I'm around people, especially mostly book people, I can just talk and talk and talk like we're doing here right now. But it's as an introvert, it drains my battery, right? And so doing a big bookstore event with readers who I love, but who I don't know, I feel like I need to kind of put on like a show, right? I'd be saying interesting things. And so this time I thought, I'm a little bit burnt out just because so much happened this year. We had the Netflix movie Damsel came out, I did the red carpet. Last year I had 3 books come out, and it's just been a lot. I've been working so hard on building up the Substack, doing my podcast and everything. So I thought I'm going to do a low stress party, just my best writer friends and book friends. I don't even have to I don't have to think of anything to say. If I don't even talk about my book during the whole dinner, it's fine. And so I just had them all go to Books Inc. in Palo Alto, which is in the same shopping complex as the Tapas restaurant. And so they all pre-ordered the book there, and they pre-ordered because we wanted to make sure that the books were there on that day. And they walked over to the bookstore, picked up their copies, and then walked down past a few shops, and then we had this nice table on a patio, and I just treated them to a really nice tapas dinner, and then I signed some books, and it was on theme, and it was just so wonderful. And I think that part of it's honestly, that was my 9th book that was published, and so I have done a lot of bookstore events, and so I didn't feel like I had to do a bookstore event this time. I think that's such an amazing experience to get to share that time with your readers and have the signing line. Everyone should do a bookstore event at some point. I highly recommend it for your for your first launch party. Have it at a bookstore, But there was just something really lovely this time about just relaxing with my friends. And so, but next year, I think for my next book, which I will announce pretty soon, I'm going to do a bookstore event. So that will be another thing that my readers can actually come to, because I did feel bad that some of my readers reached out and said, "Hey, are you going on tour? Can I come to an event?" I'm like, "Yeah, no, sorry." Next year though.
And on your, when you went to this tapas restaurant, did you also listen to these Spotify songs you handpicked? Let's Fall in Love for the Night and all the others?
No, this time we didn't, just because it's there were other people around us, so I couldn't really play music. But yeah, that was super fun to put together that playlist and to have a book club kit that's also available on my Substack for anyone who wants to have questions to discuss with their book clubs as well. So yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Evelyn, I'm so happy for you. And there is another thing we definitely have to talk about, and this is your Damsel movie premiere and the question what to wear. And I showed my hubby a picture, and I also sent it via WhatsApp, and I told my daddy and my mom, I told them, hey, I'm, interviewing Evelyn Skye. They were like, oh, in Germany, no clue who is Evelyn Skye. But then I sent this picture from Netflix, and they were, wow, she's on the red carpet and everything. And even my mom, she wrote me a text message asking me, how did the interview with Evelyn went? How is she and everything? So apparently, this red carpet, is something that attracts a lot of people. How did you decide what to wear to this damsel movie premiere? Evelyn?
Yeah, so I got to try on so many dresses, and I don't know if you've seen, there was a Substack post where I said, here's all the different things that I'm trying on. So that was super fun. And I have this tradition that I kind of forgot about for a while, but I used to always wear a red dress to my book launches because in Taiwanese culture, red is a lucky color. And so when I got to that dress and I put it on, and I was like, oh yeah, this is the one, and so yeah, that's how I chose the dress. It's funny because I didn't realize it. The red matches the red that they use in the Netflix logo. And so in the photos of me on the red carpet, it's like this perfect complement with Netflix right in the background. But yeah, that was a truly extraordinary experience, and not at all like my normal life where I'm working in the corner of my bedroom.
Was your hubby with you?
Yes. So my daughter went as well. Yeah, my husband.
Or your dog?
No, my daughter. No, just my husband and daughter. And so it was really fun. I mean, we did the well, they didn't do the red carpet. I did the red carpet. They shot videos for me while I was doing that. And
Evelyn,
oh my gosh, that's really what the photographers do. They're shouting your name, and then they're like raising their hands trying to get you to look at their camera, so you're smiling for their camera, and the lights are flashing, and so you walk to, there's different spots on the red carpet where you stop because there's different banks of photographers. And so you go to the first one, and then they shout your name, and then you're posing. And then there's a red carpet captain. Like, her job is to tell you where to go. So once that first bank of photographers has had enough time, then they say, okay, Evelyn, now you go here. And so you go to the next thing. So there's actually like different damsel backgrounds that I was standing in front of, and then they take your picture. And then when you're done, then you're done. And then we went to watch the movie screening. So like a bunch of the actors were there, the director was there, and it's just a really interesting experience to be watching a movie with all of the artists and the film crew and the producers who made this movie happen, because everyone's so much more vocal during the watching. People are like applauding when things happen and like shouting and whistling. So that was super fun. And then there was an after party. All the actors are there as well. And because it was New York, there's also models, there were actors from other Netflix shows, like some of the Avatar actors were there as well, because that movie came out around the same time. So yeah, it was so much fun. Like maybe once in a lifetime. I hope I get to do it again, but that was incredible.
I love this. And I also know, Evelyn, that in the interview with David McElroy, you also shared that you not suffer, but you have like a special, it's not a disease, but you have a special, it's not a disability, but how would you call it?
It's just the way that my brain works.
Special superpower. You have a special superpower. I love it.
Yeah, it's called aphantasia. So there's not a ton known about it yet, but like it's basically your brain can't really see images. So there's a scale that that doctors use to kind of see like how vividly you see images in your head. So some people see absolutely nothing, and that's like a 1 on the scale. On a 5, it's people who can imagine images that are just, it's so real that it's like, it's real life. It's like me looking at my laptop right now in front of me. That's how crisp and clear it is for people who are 5s on the aphantasia scale. So they are fantastic. So the A in front of it means like you can't see the images, right? So I'm a 2. So that means that if I try to see things in my head, they're just really, really blurry. They're kind of like color blobs, depending on like, I mean, it's not like I don't exist in reality. I know what a computer looks like, right? But if I am not looking, if I don't have this computer right here in front of me, I can't clearly really see what a computer is. So the funny thing that means I don't really know what my characters look like, and I forget to care because it's not an important thing for me personally. So working on this recent book that is coming out in 2025, my editor had all these notes, and she doesn't know I have aphantasia, and she just had these notes like throughout, like, hey, can we get a little bit more setting description here? Like, what does this place look like? Hey, can you tell us a little bit more like what these characters look like? It was like, and I was just laughing as I read the notes because it's like I just forget. I forget. So I have to put in those descriptions, but it's also why that when I write, I tend to I build setting that I think has more feeling in it. I talk a lot about writing setting almost as a character. People have talked about my descriptions. Ironically, people say my descriptions are very vivid, but it's because I come at it from an atmospheric sense first. How does this place feel to a person? And then later I remember to layer on the details, oh yeah, what kind of trees are there? I don't know. Let's Google and see what kind of trees exist in this region. I'll just put in some trees. So yeah.
So I know that you now have 4,000 subscribers on Substack. And I heard that you imported 50% from your MailChimp list. And MailChimp was for you all about promotion and selling your books. What is Substack now for you? Because there you have a different approach.
Yeah, so I brought over about 1750 from MailChimp, and that was my old author newsletter that I started back in 2015 before my first book even came out. And that was when Twitter was still a kind and wonderful place for authors. And so I was able to hype up my book. And again, this is back in the day before, when people still cared about pre-orders and they didn't care if they couldn't buy a book for a year. So that's really where a lot of those fans came from, and I built it up a little bit in the years after that, but then it kind of just went dormant for a long time. And all I did on MailChimp was send out an email every once in a while saying, hey, my new book is out, or oh, here's, a sale. And so when I found out that Substack was free, because I was paying on MailChimp for my subscribers, I came over to Substack and I was just doing it as a normal newsletter a little bit for, not really doing much on it for I don't know, a few months or something. I tried going paid early on. This was February of 2023. And I didn't really have a strategy. I was basically putting out a lot of writing advice, articles about writing advice, but I quickly burned out on that. And that's how I kind of discovered, and I think this is important on Substack, is to experiment to figure out who you are on Substack. Like you said, who are you on Substack? What are you doing on Substack? How is it different than just sending out, hey, I have a book sale? So I burned out really quickly on that, and I found out I am not a teacher of craft. That's I will leave that to the Janine Olets of the world in Writing in the Dark, those kinds of wonderful creative writing teachers. That's what they do for a living. That's what they love talking about. I know a lot about writing craft, but I don't like to talk about it. I like to talk about building writing careers and creative careers. And I love talking about things like this, how to make your Substack work, how to make your marketing and publicity work, what to do on social media, and that's what I talk about when I meet up with my other author friends. So eventually, I turned off that paid subscription back in 2023, early 2023, pretty quickly. I think it was within a couple months. I offered everyone refunds, and some people just said no, just keep the money. It's fine. I want to support you, and that was great. And the other people I refunded, which was also totally fine with me because I'm I'm not giving you what I promised. And though all of those writing posts are actually still available on my Substack, but now they're open to the public, so that's under the writing advice section on my Substack, and then I kind of just went back to doing nothing on Substack for the rest of 2023 and occasionally sending stuff out. I had books coming out. Actually, I didn't do nothing. That's a total lie. I forgot. But I was basically just promoting my books. 2023 was the year that I had 3 books come out. Damsel came out in hardcover. The 100 Loves of Juliet came out. And then Princess Private Eye, which was my Disney work-for-hire princess collaboration, that came out. So I was basically promoting those books, doing whatever normal author publicity that you do, hey, here's, where you can find the books. Here's where my tour schedule is, that kind of stuff. I interviewed my author for my editor, for Damsel. But I still wasn't thinking about growing my newsletter list. And so it wasn't growing at all. I wasn't offering anything to the Substack community other than self-promotion of my books. And it was fine at the time because that base of 1750, they were my existing readers and fans. So that's fine. But then February of this year, I actually decided I'm going to try to grow this Substack because what I finally realized, which a lot of other people realized before me, was that Substack has such amazing growth possibility. And we're actually still, I know Substack itself has been around for a long time, but I feel like in the fiction community, authors are just beginning to discover it. And it is in that way, we can be early adopters still. I decided, okay, well, who do I want to be here? What's important to me as an author? And that is to give back to the writing community and to help writers, but not in the way of teaching them how to, write a book, right? But in the, what is the unique thing I can share? And I realized it's this talking about careers. It's the thing that I love doing already with my friends. So why don't we just film it? So it took a little while for me to get there. I launched the podcast in June of this year. And before that, from February to June, I had like a little bit of growth. I wasn't on Substack notes, really. I didn't know what to do on Substack notes. I was just like every week I would restack whatever my post was. Sometimes I wouldn't even bother saying anything on it because I was just really frustrated with notes. I thought, every time I post something, like no one even sees it. There's not a single like, like what's the point of being here? This is, frankly, I thought stupid, which I revised my opinion now. But so I was kind of figuring out like, who I was, offering different kind of things through my writing. And then I finally decided, I'm going to do this thing with my video podcast. I'm going to invite all these people that I've met throughout my career onto the show. And we're going to talk about not book promotion, like how most podcasts, when they invite authors are, it's usually if they're on tour, they want to promote like, oh, buy my book. This is what it's about. Here's how I wrote it. I want to talk about, how did you build this career? How did you start from nothing? It's like what you and I did early in the beginning of this episode. Where did you start when you just decided you wanted to be a writer? How long did it take you? What are the trials and tribulations? But then also, every author has different things that they're good at. Like some of them, like Alka Joshi, she was just on my show. She was a Reese's Book Club pick. So we talked about, okay, how did you use her? She was a marketing person like you. How did you use your marketing background and working with Reese Witherspoon to kind of like really get an audience for your book? And then how did you continue doing that, right? So like that's the kind of thing I love doing. So that's what I started doing with the podcast. And I think since then it's really blown up. And then my decision to make all of my paid subscriptions go to scholarships for writers, which everyone can obviously also apply for. I think that has done really well. People like being part of something that's good, that's doing good for the community. And so there's no pressure to be a paid subscriber. If you want to be part of the book club, that is behind a paywall because I want everyone to feel like our recordings and what we share can be a little bit more cozy and private. It's not just for the whole internet. So to get to the book club, you can either become a paid subscriber and have your money go towards scholarships, or you can just use Substack's wonderful referral service, right? Like if you invite a friend, you get a month free on my Substack. If you invite 2 friends, you get 3 months free. If you invite 3 friends, then you get an entire year of paid subscription free. And that's how you can get into the book club without actually having to pay anything. So I really love Substack. And like I said, I'm on notes now too. So we can talk about notes. I finally figured out how to do notes, and it's a wonderful way to meet other writers and actually grow your community.
If you say, I love Kristina and the Online Writing Club interview, please consider rating and reviewing my show. This helps me support more people just like you move toward the writing life and business that they desire. What I saw when I analyzed your social media ecosystem, then I saw that for instance on Instagram you are a different person than you are on Substack, as you mentioned. So on Instagram what you're doing is like autographing themselves, and on Substack you're like this behind the scenes showing the progress girl. And another thing I saw was that you did a lot, or still doing a lot of guest posting. Could you share a bit more about how you are using guest posting?
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned that I'm a different person on Instagram, and that's true. And I think it's important for writers to think about all these different platforms and use them specifically for what they're good for. So on Instagram, it's a self-promotion machine. Like there, your job is to sell your books, right? And so it's about, yeah, I show my author life, but it's like, you get 10 to 15 seconds and then everyone's attention is gone. So you have to figure out, well, what are the snippets that are like catchy there that also remember to show your book cover so people remember your book and then they buy your book, or you write you do like a little mini book trailer and tells them kind of like the small plot arc of your book, right? So that's what Instagram is. On Substack, you just have more time. People have more attention, right? This is what we love as writers, is like, oh my gosh, let me write to you. Let me tell you so much more about this process. And so I get to show you behind the scenes of like what my life is really like, and I love that. And guest posting is something I started doing that in February of this year. And that was before I came up with this idea of doing my podcast and interviewing about creative careers. And I was not actively thinking of it in terms of like book promotion, which although it later got pointed out to me that it was kind of like an old school blog tour, what I was thinking was I'd heard that cross posting is a great way to let other people discover you and maybe realize, oh, this person exists, right? Because you could be creating the best content in the world, right? And I know people hate the word content, but let's just pretend that's not a charged term. You could be creating the best Substack content in the world, but it doesn't matter if people don't know you're there, right? And so you go out to other Substacks and you write a piece. So I went to an event that was hosted by Substack. So that's the other thing. You should look for Substack meetups in your area. And if there isn't one, you can actually volunteer and Substack will appoint you as someone to put together an event at a coffee shop. I just did that in Silicon Valley a couple months ago. I said, hey, Silicon Valley, let's get together for a meetup. But before I did that, this is in February of this year, when I just decided I'm going to grow the Substack, there was a meetup in San Francisco. And so I decided to go to that. And that was actually hosted by Substack itself. And so there were just a ton of Substack writers there. And I just met people. And one of my favorite people I met is this writer, Sam Robinson. He writes Breakfast Club. He is a runner. You would think that we have nothing in common, but I just really liked him. You know, like some people you meet and you're like, oh, this guy is so friendly and I just want to be his friend, you know? And like, obviously he's a writer because he writes on Substack. He writes about running. So he's a writer, a running writer. He's also has a background in philosophy. So he was talking about like trying to expand his Substack to be like, well, what's the intersection of people who want to read about running, but also want to talk about philosophy? Anyway, so we kept in touch after that meetup, that in-person meetup. And we were just joking around because like the Damsel movie was coming out, you know, and I said, haha, what if I wrote a post for you about Elodie, the main character, and Damsel just running the whole time in the book, and how do you run away from a dragon? Yeah. But like, how do you write about running in so many different ways when, like, you know, 50% of the book is her just friggin' running, right? So I joked about that, and he's just like, yeah, but what if we did do it? And I was like, oh, okay. And so, yeah, then I wrote a post, and it was on his Substack on Breakfast Club about running, but it was also about writing, right? So like, I reached out to a few other Substackers then, and I was like, okay, well, what can I do for you, for your audience? And I think that's the important thing about when you want to cross post for someone, you cannot just be thinking like, what's in it for me, right? Because of course you're trying to get more eyeballs on your Substack, but you need to approach it as like, what can I do for you? Like, so if I'm on your Substack, you know, like what is your focus and what can I do that I can do to help make your life a little easier? So you have one less thing to post this week, right? And so like, if it's an educational career Substack, I can write about that stuff. If it's running, I write about that stuff, you know, and you do try to bring it back to you. Don't write about something that has nothing to do with you, because then you're not going to bring any subscribers. I mean, I guess you do it if it's fun, but if you're trying to grow, that's not actually a good strategy. But yeah, it's a partnership, right? And it's about building community even with people that you might not have expected would be your community.
How do you use notes, and how do you like capitalize on this social media network inside the Substack universe?
Yeah, I have to say I first saw you on Notes. So, you know, Notes does work. Yeah. So it's interesting because when Substack introduced Notes, I just immediately hated it because I hated Twitter. And what happened to me back in the day of Twitter is that I started getting addicted to having to write short, funny little things all the time, and that's how my brain just like worked. And sometimes I think of funny little things. I post them on Substack Notes, but I don't. But that was like the only thing that worked on Twitter. What I've discovered that is great about Notes is because this is a platform for readers and writers, people will read notes that are longer. Like it's not only 2 sentences, right? And so Notes is a great place to basically like be you. And the great thing about Notes, so I was on a Substack runs a thing for education for bestsellers. And so bestsellers are like, if you have like at least 100 paid subscribers, then you get to tune into these things where they kind of explain how Substack works. And it's like, it's really helpful in terms of like growth knowledge. They are explaining that Notes is geared towards, their algorithm is geared towards getting you more subscribers. And so unlike other social media where it's all about just getting more likes because they want people to advertise and all they care about is more and more likes, Substack, because they have that subscribe button right next to your name when you post a note, and because their algorithm is trying to feed your notes to people who might be interested in what your Substack is about based on all the other stuff that they subscribe to and how they interact with people on notes, it really is such a great way to build your audience and let people know that you exist. The other thing I'll say is I know people get really mad about the fact that there's subscribers and there's followers. And I have 12 or 1,300 more followers than I have subscribers. And it'd be really easy for me to be like, Substack, why don't you just make these people subscribers, But followers, for me, it's a way for them to kind of check you out. It's like window shopping, and they're going to follow Kristina for a while and be like, do I like what she's writing? And if they decide to never subscribe, okay, fine, whatever, But if they see what you're writing long enough and they're like, yeah, this is actually for me, then they will subscribe. And then that subscribe button is right there. It's so handy, right? So that's why I love notes. And I use it as a place I will still repost my publication stuff, but I'll write some funny things sometimes about writing. But also it's a good place just to think out loud, right? That was the question I asked on notes when I was trying to figure out how do I use notes. And that was a response that I got from a lot of people was, think out loud, show your personality, just be you. And so I will sometimes be like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. Or I'll be like, if it doesn't matter if your first draft is imperfect, you just have to write it, right? I'll just put out little encouraging things. And it's whatever I happen to be thinking that day. And it works really well. And so I love notes.
And I know that you now interview other incredibly successful writers and how they build their careers. What is podcasting in audio for you on Substack or in general?
Yeah, so for me, I do like this kind of video because it's natural. And I do have kind of a hatred of Instagram and TikTok videos. So I think that it really is about, like you said, finding who you are on Substack. And if audio and video work for you, then you can use it, right? In that same way that feels very genuine and easy for you. I would not advocate for anyone to do it if it doesn't feel honestly fun, because you can do perfectly well, wonderfully well on Substack with only writing. That's what it's built for. And the goal is to do this for a long time, right? And so you should only do things that you can do for a long time. For me, I actually really like hanging out with other writers and just recording ourselves chatting about whatever on video. And so Substack makes it super easy to be able to create a video podcast. And they're very smart about that because video podcasts are increasingly more popular these days, right? Even people who have had audio podcasts for a long, long, long time are now realizing, I guess I got to do video. I mean, they don't have to, but it's what a lot of people like. So what I do is I use Riverside as a software for me, and I record videos of my podcast interviews with people, and then I upload them into Substack. Again, they make it super easy because then they will automatically just take the audio from that. And so people who want to listen to the audio, they automatically feed it to Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, some of the other major streaming podcast providers. You don't have to do anything. So I just do that. And if you don't like video and you only want to do audio, all you do is you record your audio podcast and you upload that audio file to Substack and they will put it everywhere for you. So I love it because if you were starting a traditional podcast by yourself, it would be really hard to get that audience if I'm just publishing on Apple Podcasts. I mean, frankly, most people are my subscribers on Substack. This goes straight into their inbox. It goes to either their email or their Substack app. And that means I think I'm now 4,200 subscribers as of today when we're recording, 4,200 people get my podcast every single week in their inbox. And that is a number of viewers and listeners I would not be able to reach if I was just starting out on Apple Podcasts by myself or on YouTube. So I love it. I love that Substack makes it easy and it's fun for me.
I would like to know, what is your goal for 2024 and also for, let's say, 2025 and beyond for your Substack? Because I guess your Substack is like the place to be and the place where you would want your readers and fans to connect with you. Am I right about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my dream would be to be able to quit Instagram. That's really the only other place I am right now. I don't know if that will ever be possible. I won't say ever, but I do think it's still kind of an important part of an author's toolkit because a lot of people are there and they're not on Substack yet. But my dream would be just entirely on Substack because this is a place where I actually feel like it's my place. It's a home for writers. And I know they're expanding to more kinds of media, but like it still feels at its core. Like this is where I'm comfortable and where I'm the most truly myself. My goal for my Substack right now for the rest of 2024 is to really reach as many writers as possible. Like we were talking about, the discoverability is the main thing. I feel like what I'm putting out in terms of my Substack is great, really helpful informational content. So I really just want to grow my subscriber base as much as possible because if it's about giving back to writers, I want to be able to give back to as many writers as I possibly can. So that's probably my biggest goal for 2024. In 2025, I don't know. I mean, I live here in Silicon Valley, and what's very much the startup mentality here is you just start, and you don't need to know anything beyond step one or phase one. And then you pivot, like wherever I get at the end of 2024, when I start 2025, I'll say, okay, cool. We have this number of subscribers. These are the kinds of things that they seem like they like. What else can I give, and we'll see where it goes. So I have no definitive plans, and I kind of like, I don't know, it comes back to your idea of freedom. I like living that way, we'll see. It's an adventure.
What would you like to tell those who lack confidence, time, budget to start and grow a writing business? So what would be, let's say, your number one advice for those?
My number one advice is don't quit your day job and give yourself time and patience to build your writing career. Because if you quit your day job, you will have so much financial pressure on your writing, and that actually stifles creativity. And so I say keep an income stream that's reliable for as long as possible. And I know it does make it harder because then you have to work in the evenings, and stuff like that. But I think you can do it. And my second part, actually, of this recommendation is a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. It completely changed the way that I work as a writer. It's all about how can you intensely focus in a very distracted world with social media, all these things trying to vie for your attention. And I think that if you are keeping your day job, or like me when I was starting out, when I was no longer, living near where my parents were, my daughter was only in preschool for 2 hours a day. How could I possibly get writing done in 2 hours a day? If you can learn to filter out these distractions and really sit in that space, that creative space, you can get an extraordinary amount done in 2 hours.
Yeah, and this was another question from someone. How much time do you actually spend on Substack and marketing and promoting your books, Evelyn?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to answer another question which wasn't asked, which is how much time I spend writing my books. And so I think that for me, I will get into this deep work phase. I can sit in it for 2 hours max at a time. So if I'm writing a brand new book from scratch and I don't have anything yet, I'll spend about an hour and a half for my first session in the morning, and then I'll take a break for lunch. And during lunch, I'm still thinking about the book, but I'm not actively writing anything. And then I'll go back to my computer for another hour and a half or 2 hours. And that's it. I have 3 or 4 hours a day maximum writing. And that's what works for me. It seems very realistic. After that, what I write, it's so thin and it sucks, and I might as well just, save up some energy, go do something else, hang out with your family, go for a walk, watch a show that you love. How much time do I spend on Substack? It's a little hard to measure because I just really love Substack. And so whenever I'm not writing a book, I'm just kind of like poking around on Substack all the time. I know people say that weekends are a bad time for Substack notes, but actually I think it's great because I feel like, at least with writers, a lot of us are like, hey, I'm finally not doing all the crazy stuff of my life and my job during the week, and I can be on Substack notes. So I just like browsing on notes on the weekends. And so I'm kind of just like poking in and out on Substack all the time. And then in terms of writing posts, depends how long the post is. So I'll probably spend an hour or 2 hours on a post. When I get into these like immersive flow states, I lose track of time. So sometimes I don't really know how long it'll be. But I have this experience where I'll say to my husband, like he wants to go do something. I was like, yeah, just give me like 5 minutes. I'm just finishing something up, like 10 minutes max. And then, like an hour later, I've been like polishing this one paragraph. But it's fun. I love it. And if it weren't fun, I wouldn't spend that much time on it. And then in terms of like marketing and publicity for my books tends to come in phases. And so like I said, I have that publicity calendar that we can link to. And that really shows you that it's centered about like 3 months of time, like just a little before the book comes out and then after the book comes out. And then other than that, I'll just have my Instagram stuff. I have a social media manager. She helps me. She's amazing. So that now she will maintain, now that my book is out and I'm not actively promoting it, she'll be making like videos and stuff, like once a week or something for that, just to kind of make sure I still have a presence. If I need to be on any videos, then obviously I'll film it, but she'll do like the really pretty visual stuff. Cause again, I have aphantasia. I don't really see things visually. So she makes really nice, pretty things for me. And then Substack marketing and publicity, it's really just being on Substack notes and writing guest posts. And so that's as much time or as little time as you want to spend on it. But what has worked really well for me on Substack notes recently is like trying to post like at least 2 times a day. But if you miss a day, it's like fine. It's not like other social media where you're going to get penalized for not writing. At least that's what I've seen.
What would you recommend new writers if they want to, start? Is it more short stories or is it a novel? Can you recommend anything?
I think that you should do what you enjoy. And so the thing that a lot of people don't recognize is that every kind of writing is actually quite different. And so writing short stories is different than the skill of writing novels. And for example, a lot of people think, oh, I have grandkids now, I'm going to write a picture book. It'll be so easy. But there's actually quite a lot of skill that goes into the craft of writing a good picture book, right? So none of these things are easy. I love writing novels. I know how to write novels. I don't know how to write short stories. I don't know how to write a very good, short story that's maybe like 25 pages or 50 pages because I haven't trained myself in, where are the plot points? How do you do character development? What are the important things of a character in such a short space? Similarly, I've had producers in the past ask me if I would be interested in writing the screenplay for my book. And I tried it once and I had fun, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, you know what? There's other people who understand what hooks a viewing audience and I don't know how to do that. So I don't think that there's any one recommendation. It's not like if you start with short stories, it doesn't mean you're going to be make it better as a novelist versus if you just start with a novel. So it's really like you said, if you have time considerations and you're like, I really want to get this thing done and for my grandkids at Christmas, then you should do that, focus on that. But don't do something because you think that it is the right step to get you where you want to go.
Another thing was if you're writing your book, I heard from some writers, for instance, from Veronica Jocker-Smith. She now got a book deal with Penguin Random House. And she told me that they gave her like 3 months to write her book. Is it similar with your publishers in your situation in America that you also have just like the 3 months to write your book?
Is she writing nonfiction?
She is writing nonfiction.
Okay, yeah. So nonfiction and fiction work differently in the United States, at least. So with nonfiction, you can sell your book to a publisher on a proposal. And so you have an idea and you have kind of an outline. And then if they decide that they want to publish it, then they'll give you a timeline for, okay, you need to finish it in this amount of time. If it's fiction, how it usually works in the US is you have to have already written the whole thing. And so you need to do all of the editing and polishing by yourself or with critique partners who are other writers who can help you. They can beta read. They can say, hey, this part is slow. Maybe I don't understand the setting here. Can you describe a little better? So you make it really good like that on your own. And sometimes if you get an agent, they can help you, or a freelance editor, if you're going to go self-publish, then they can help you polish it up a little bit even better. So by the time you get a book deal, then it's nearly done. I mean, sometimes the editor will say, okay, actually, I don't like this whole section. Take it out and rewrite it. But then you work together. And so you don't have a fixed deadline. And in my experience, what happens is they'll have a goal like, oh, we would like to publish this, in 18 months. And so maybe we'll try to get this done in 6 months because traditional publishing, usually you have to finish your book about 1 year before it's published because then they have a lot of stuff they're doing with like interior design, cover design, marketing, publicity, that kind of stuff. But if you don't finish your edits and you and your editor agree that the book is not how you want it yet, then you just keep working on it and they just push out the release date farther.
So now, Evelyn, I have like 2 last questions in the rapid fire questions section here for you. So rapid fire questions for you. I'd like to know, what's your favorite thing to do with your daughter?
Go to bookstores, honestly. She's learning to drive right now, and so one of the fun tasks is, hey, let's go driving this weekend. Where do you want to go? And she'll say, I think we need more books.
I love that. And what do you do on a date night with your hubby?
Oh my goodness.
I guess books are involved.
Sometimes books, we like to try to find new and different things to do. And so like upcoming date we have is we're going to one of those like paint and sip kind of things where you can get a glass of wine and then there's an art instructor and they say, hey, we're going to paint this thing. So we found one where we're using black light paints, I guess. And so we're going to paint a jellyfish using black light paint where if you put a black light, which we don't have, but if you had a black light, it would change colors. So yeah, we just try to like look up, we'll just Google what's happening this weekend and we'll go do something fun. And sometimes we just stay in. Sometimes it's nice to just stay in and watch a movie.
So I guess the most important thing is, please tell us what's the best place to connect with you, Evelyn.
I would say please come to creativeinspiredhappy.com. That is my Substack. It's my writing community, is where my podcast is. It is such a warm and friendly community and it's all built on kindness. So yeah, come hang out with us.
Evelyn, thank you so much. It was delightful.
This was wonderful. Thanks so much for having me, Kristina.
Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe and like the episode. Extra credits. Tell me in the comments what you liked best about the episode.